we would come in behind the meter and offer, say like, hey, we won't pay negative prices. We'll actually pay a low price, but a base load so that you don't have to sell at a negative price. And then we'll actually, in some cases, if we negotiate the term, if the contract, we'll negotiate the contract such that if the price becomes a reasonable amount that you can sell to the grid to factories and industry, homes, and other users, then you can sell to the grid. We'll turn off our data center. And we would use low-cost miners to do that. And we would essentially provide like a base load for that. In doing so, that kind of helped expand some of that growth there in West Texas, as well as educate ERCOT and other power grid providers in the US on the benefits of these types of programs. And speaking of too, that company Lancium, they recently signed an agreement with Stargate, which is also a SoftBank, but the original SoftBank and OpenAI, and they're doing campus for their AI development together with Oracle and Stargate and those guys in Abilene, Texas.
And you see all these previous crypto miners, some of them did make it to the AI big leagues, CoreWeaver being one of them. And as you mentioned, Lancium, Crusoe. So there's plenty of those groups that are in development with AI. You mentioned one thing about the credit worthiness really in Bitcoin mining to these power plants and to the grid operators. When you were with SBI, how was the credit conversations with these local electric providers, especially state-owned electric providers, knowing that Bitcoin was still a little bit on the fringe? How often did that come up, and how many of them maybe didn't believe you were going to be around in a few years?
That's definitely the case. For us, it wasn't as much trouble, but that's definitely the case for a lot of miners. And even today, for example, if I go try to raise money now with Bitcoin mining, there's enough still firms, even today, and like private equity firms that won't trust the credit worthiness Bitcoin miners, even public Bitcoin miners. Like even if I were to secure a public Bitcoin mining client with a data center I'm building, and I try to use some firms as well to help come into the cap table to raise money, there are some that are still distrusting of that. And of course, some pubco miners, I won't say names, have economics that they need to improve on and their operating costs. But in terms of capitalization, especially for smaller miners, it is a concern. And often what will happen is there'll be large deposits, especially for PPAs, for collateral. And this will require significant cash reserves, at least on credit. And we still had to do this, at least on credit worthiness. Behind us, we had SBI Group, which is a financial conglomerate of 270, 300 companies, right? It's publicly traded. It's audited by Deloitte. It's a public company, so everything's all public. So we didn't quite have that problem, but it is definitely when you're negotiating those kind of contracts and credit worthiness becomes an issue, it can be a problem. And so there are several creative ways to do it, and that can differ depending on state, depending on grid provider, your power broker. And that can be things of depositing money for collateral, using some of your assets as collateral if you're able to do that. And there's differing methods to do it. But that is still an ongoing issue today.
So let's transition to where you are today, Carson, and you're at 21 Tree Capital and any of your other endeavors and projects. Tell me more about that, and what do you see for the next couple months for you guys and building Bitcoin mining? Are you still actively involved, and what's on the top of mind for you today?
So I'm still actively involved in Bitcoin mining. I would say I'm 99% Bitcoin mining. And the reason I say I'm 99% is Bitcoin mining is in my blood and is what I want to do. I mentioned we talked some of AI, and some of that comes to in that I'm not looking necessarily for a turn play to AI, but some of the investors that I'm talking to want to do some AI and at the same time as Bitcoin mining. So utilizing some of the techniques that we learned in operating at low cost, some we cannot replicate for AI. Some very specific differences, and that goes into another long conversation that's too long for here. But there are some specific differences, but there are also some techniques that we can apply that we've learned over the years from Bitcoin mining to AI build-outs and management. And that helps with what some of those investors want in terms of building out new data centers. So 21 Tree Capital is really just basically a family office investing primarily in either infrastructure, Bitcoin and mining infrastructure, or Bitcoin companies. Some of the Bitcoin companies that invested, like even public companies like MetaPlanet, it has investments into those. Going into that, below that, some of the companies, as we mentioned before, are like Density AI. Density AI does AI and Bitcoin mining, and then Merkle Edge. Merkle Edge is a US-based company with my partner who's a longtime oil and gas, working at several large investment bank and private equity firms, doing hundreds of billions in oil and gas deals and asset management. And through that, we're looking at some renewable energy, but also focusing on a lot of oil and gas and utilizing stranded gas where we're able to achieve cost well below 2 cents. In some cases, 1 cent and maybe even below. And we're doing this at scales of larger than 10 gigawatts. However, we're doing this too in that, so we have exclusivity in that we're the sole developer. We utilize our data center experience to develop data centers to do that, and then to purchase gas to develop data centers. However, we're not able to develop 10 gigawatts of data centers ourselves. That's a lot of money to go in just for ourselves. So we're also too talking to others to raise money to further build out data centers. Some, and even that full capacity, we may not be able to bring everyone on the same cap table, especially miners who are competitors to each other. So we're talking about breaking out in different areas into different projects or different legal entities where it's okay, one miner here that we're working with, and or an AI or data center company over here. And that's the same case too. Maybe a data center company doesn't want to work with miners. But going back to the heart of it, our focus is on Bitcoin mining and building out the infrastructure for the next, or actually not the next, but the current revolution in digital finance.
So you haven't left, you're still building strong. And it sounds like, to your point, you have big visions and very cheap power costs. How important is it? Obviously, the power costs in the Bitcoin mining industry, AI doesn't matter as much, but what are you seeing in this transition and how important does it matter?
I think AI will matter. And some of the AI companies I talk to are forward looking and they think the same thing. Maybe I'm wrong and maybe they're wrong, but in some ways, Bitcoin mining in the early days didn't care as much about power costs as they do now. AI, I think they will as well. Several months ago, Jensen, CEO of NVIDIA, he came on I think it was at a conference, and he called himself the Chief Revenue Destroyer Officer. And he's made comments referring to how he wants to have generations of chips that come out every year or every 2 years, every 3 years. Sounds familiar, right? Sounds like miners. So you'll have AI companies that will have to reinvest substantial capex into buying new AI chips every year. With AI chips, when you think of offtake clients who want to use that, they'll want to use the latest and greatest AI chips. You'll still find some who don't mind older ones, but most of your clients will want to use the newest technology. And so the oldest technology, in order for them to use that, you'll have to lower the pricing, which lowers your revenue on it. And that severely affects the margins for running older chips, as well as the depreciation, because now your assets are depreciating fast. You need a quick return on investment. And all these kind of dynamics together, along with a growing increase in the number of competitors in the market space, will just further kind of commoditize the market. And it's some way commodity works and how this whole structure works, right, is that I think it will push the incentive for lower and lower power prices down for all or most AI companies. Maybe I say most, in that some AI companies still may be relevant, that they don't fully care about as much power. They may care about very specific locations to population centers. That may be their niche and what's always important to them. But I think over time, even the ones who aren't caring about power will care about power, and they'll care about it more and more. As I just mentioned, some that I'm talking to now are already starting to see that and look forward and seeing that. And for mining, we already do that now. And we've done that for the last several years. And that's a key driver in any miner's metric whenever they're planning a new build. And if you're looking at this and you're planning a new mining build, one of your biggest factors that you should consider is your cost of power. And you should consider that cost of power too, not just your pure cost of power and how much money you're making each month, but also consider your cost of power and consider that too against in some ways, your competitors. In mining, they're both your competitors and they're also collaborators. Everybody works together to strengthen Bitcoin, and that helps support Bitcoin and drives Bitcoin price higher. But you're also competing for the same Bitcoin rewards each day. And part of that too, with a main driver of your cost being the cost of power, you need to consider your cost of power in relation to the cost of power for other competitors. So for ones, if you're paying 10 cent power, 11 cent power for mining, I doubt anyone is, but that you should look for other uses, things like that. And I won't go into specifics too of like what you should use, because sometimes there's different dynamics of like maybe of just certain where you utilize some power for mining at some point of the day, and some points of the day you use that power for other like factory, other resources. And this kind of complicates the dynamics of your business model. And so every business model is different. Or some you may use the heat, like district heating, use the heat from miners to heat local homes or hot springs or things like that. That can change the influence that for power costs and other factors into your business model.
So Carson, I think you hit on a few great points there. The first one being that just like miners move from site to site over time, and from lower efficiency miners moving from higher cost of energy to lower cost of energy as their life cycle goes through, GPUs are going to do the same thing. And as we scale out, the applications and the customers for AI is changing and is moving, I guess, up closer to smaller businesses, away from your cloud providers. So always still be there, but basically more customers are always going to come on the AI train and trying to bring their own AI resources and owned services needed to their customer. So my question is regarding the size and scale of these developments. Obviously, we're seeing massive gigawatt data centers across the board. Do you think there is going to be a need or for 5 megawatt, 10 megawatt, 20 megawatt sites for AI? Or is that unique to Bitcoin? And can you talk more about that, maybe why those edge locations, where they exist and who their customers are?
So going for AI, some of the AI companies that I've talked to that have done like very specific, like direct requests for offtake that we may potentially build for. And like I said, we're still mostly building for Bitcoin mining. That's what we really care about. But we're still talking to some AI as we just to maximize the power resources and data center development capacity that we have and our expertise. But going back to talking to some of the AI companies, some of them are looking at to do direct offtake agreements for smaller amounts. And those smaller amounts have been like 5 megawatts. There's one looking at 5, there's another one at 15, and there's another one at 20. And then if you look at to like the full cost for developing an AI data center, if you're looking at like, and two, when I say full cost, it also depends on like from what voltage and what levels of responsibility that you're including. But kind of a general rule of thumb, like if you're looking at NVIDIA chips, you're looking at something of like $25 to $30 million per megawatt. So it's a very high cost for that.